Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to our latest webinar, which is a CV masterclass with Radical Recruit. My name is Martin Sigsworth. I'm the Senior Employment Manager with Thomas Pockler Trust. I've just got a few quick housekeeping things to go through and then I'll pass over to Emma to go through her presentation. So first of all, just to let you know that anybody who's joining is currently muted and their videos are off. I know that some assistive tech users have not been aware of that before, so just to reiterate, the only people that you can see in here are going to be myself and Emma. Regarding questions, there's going to be time for questions at the end. There's a Q&A panel as part of Zoom. So if you type your questions in there, Emma will go through them at the end. Please try and keep them as clear and concise as possible, because that'll Emma is also using a presentation tonight, which we will send out to everybody after the webinar is concluded. But she will be speaking around all the slides for those that can't see. We're also recording the webinar this evening and we're planning on making that available on the Thomas Pocklington Trust website in the next couple of days. So if you want to check that out, that'll be www.pocklington-trust.org.uk. Finally, we want to make these webinars as good as we possibly can. So in the next couple of days, we'll be sending out a survey, just asking you about tonight's session. It won't take you that long to complete, but if you could complete that for us, that'd be really great. You know, we can't make these better without your feedback, good or bad. So now that's all the housekeeping done. I'm really excited about tonight's session. I met Emma earlier this year. I really love what Radical Recruit are doing, and I hope that you'll enjoy the CV math she's doing. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Emma to introduce herself and start. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Martin. Hello, everyone. My name's Emma, and I'm the founder of Radical Recruit. I'm really, really happy to be here with you today, even though it's boiling hot outside, and probably if you're sitting in your flat, even warmer. I'm going to dive straight in and do a cheeky plug and take some questions and questions at the end of the webinar. And I kind of feel like it might be useful first to set the scene before we get into all things CVs, because this may help you manage your expectations as a job seeker moving forward. Yep, okay, so setting the scene. Around 7.6 million jobs, or 24% of the UK workforce, are at risk because of COVID-19. The term at risk encompasses permanent layoffs, temporary furloughs, and reductions in hours and pay. So the reality is that most employers aren't hiring. For people like you, what this means is that the market has been flooded with candidates with recent work experience, and your competition to secure a job from a significantly reduced pool of jobs has become even harder. That said, 10 days ago, the Recruitment and Employment Confederation published some data via their Recovery Jobs Tracker that shows that the labour market has grown slightly during May. So in the first month of June, in the first week of June, there were 963,000 live job adverts, which was an increase from 950,000 job adverts listed in the first week of May. Now, assuming there isn't another spike in COVID-related infections and fatalities, and that the lockdown restrictions continue to be reduced over the coming months, it's pretty reasonable to assume that we will continue to see more employers do more recruitment as we move through the remainder of the year. So the next time you find yourself feeling annoyed or frustrated that you haven't found a job yet, remember we are in the middle of a pandemic. There are more candidates for fewer jobs, and the market right now is pretty tough. Okay, so when I was thinking about what I could tell you that you may not already know, my mind wandered back to when I was a candidate, and I had on countless occasions found the perfect job, customized my CV and cover letter, submitted my application, and prayed that I would get a call back, and then nothing. We've all been there. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that more often than not, your job application is lost in what I call a CV black hole, and you're left wondering why the employer wasn't for you. So I figure the best place to start is really with ATS technology. And I encountered candidate after candidate who have no idea what ATS technology is. So basically, ATS technology is a bot, and they're the gatekeeper to the recruiter that you want your CV in front of. So the first part of my presentation is really about teaching you how to beat the bots. Sorry. Give me a second. Okay, so what many job seekers don't realise is that 75% of job applications are rejected before they're seen by a human person. So you send your application to a job and the computer says yes or no, basically. It has to pass a muster with what is known as an applicant tracking system, or ATS. So for the first part of this webinar, I was going to talk you through everything you need to know about applicant tracking systems and what you can do to optimise your CV and beat those pesky bots. So I refer to it as ATS for the rest of the presentation. It's software used by recruiters and employers during the hiring process to collect, sort, scan and rank job applications that they're receiving from open positions. So to give you an idea, I use ATS technology. I'm a one-woman show. And I've got 3 alcohol and other drug practitioner roles up on my jobs board at the moment. I have received over 300 applications for those 3 jobs. The applicant tracking system was initially created for large corporations that are accustomed to dealing with several thousand inbound job applications on a weekly basis. Today, around 98% of Fortune 500 companies rely on ATS software to help streamline their recruitment processes. However, what began as a recruitment solution for large employers has turned into a commonplace tool for companies of all shapes and sizes. Radical Recruit's a really good example of the types of organisations that are using ATS technology to streamline and manage their applicant sort of journey, I guess, into their recruitment process and jobs. So next slide. There we go. So applicant tracking systems act as an electronic gatekeeper for employers. The ATS parses CV's content into categories and then scans it for specific words to determine if the job application should be passed along to the recruiter. Its job is essentially to weed out unqualified applicants so the recruiter can devote his or her time to evaluating the candidates rather than identifying applicants who are a good fit. So in other words, the ATS is apt to toss the least qualified candidates out of the process rather than identify the candidates who are the best fit. Unfortunately, that means if a CV is not written and formatted with the applicant tracking system in mind, a qualified candidate can be easily passed over, which means that person's CV doesn't make it to the human recruiter. So if you take away nothing else from today's session, the following 7 beat the bot tips are really worth noting, as they will ensure your CV is compliant for an ATS. So tip number 1, select the right file type for your CV. This is it's a really tricky thing. You might have the most beautiful, intelligent CV tailored specifically for the job. But contrary to popular belief, a PDF is not the most ATS-friendly file type. So while PDF files are the best at preserving the design and format of your CV, and whilst most people save them as PDFs to submit to jobs, it's not compatible with all ATS software. So if you're asked to upload your CV to an applicant tracking system and PDF is listed among the file types you can use, by all means use PDF version of your CV. However, if the system does not specify which types are compatible, I really could not recommend more highly that you play it safe and stick to a Word document in .doc or .docx. Plain text files are also incredibly ATS friendly for CVs, but they kind of limit your formatting options. Since best CVs are written with audiences in mind, the robots pre-screening your application and the live human in HR who will review your CV, should it make it past the ATS, these two things considered, I would recommend using a Word document instead of a plain text file for your CV type. So this will provide sort of more creative freedom to write a CV that will appeal to both the robot and the hiring manager. So the next tip I've got to share with you is don't put important details in the header or footer. Not all applicant tracking systems are able to properly read and parse information stored in the header and the footer sections of a Word document. So it's really important that the information that would enable a recruiter to contact you don't appear in your header and footer. Tip number 3. Optimize your CV with keywords. So one of the best ways to ensure your CV is compatible with an ATS is to use keywords. There's a difference between a keyword and a buzzword. So buzzwords are typically considered to be sort of fluffy marketing terms such as, I don't know, proactive or you know, self-starter. As a recruiter, when I hear these words, I kind of cringe a little bit. Everyone uses them. What you need to do is use keywords that represent both your soft skills and your hard skills, which are relevant to the job that you're applying for. So these are the skills that you acquire over the years that qualify you for your target job, the job you're applying for. If you're not sure which key skills to use, there's this really great resource online, it's free, called Wordle. And basically what that will enable you to do is copy and paste, say, 3, 4, 5 job descriptions that are similar to the ones that you want to apply for into the program, and it will collect all of the keywords for you. So then you don't need to really do a lot of thinking, and you can tailor your CV using the keywords that spits out. Some applicant tracking systems will determine the strength of your skills based on the number of times a specific term or keyword shows up. So add as many. I would aim to add the same keywords 2 or 3 times throughout your CV. To make a CV that's truly compatible with ATS, you want to optimize your CV with both systems in mind. So be careful. I'm going to come back to this in a little bit later, but I think if you're not sure what keywords to use, go to Wordle and have a look at what the data that pulls from the job descriptions. I use it for my candidates. My conversion rate from CV to interview is really high. The next thing that I think you need to do is create a list of core competencies or areas of expertise in sort of the top section of your CV. So you'll have your name, your address or postcode probably, and all the ways that a recruiter can contact you. Then you will have a career summary, a professional summary, which I'm going to touch on a little bit later. And then the next thing that makes your CV really ATS friendly is having a core competencies or areas of expertise section. And that's the place where you list all of your strongest hard skills and soft skills. If there's a common abbreviation for one of your proficiencies, like maybe SEO for search engine optimization, include both versions in your CV so that if the ATS technology doesn't pick up SEO, it will still pick up search engine optimization. Then pepper this term into your work experience or education sections where appropriate. Some applicant tracking systems will associate the length of experience for a skill based on how long you held the job and where the skill was leveraged. For instance, if you worked at your past job for 5 years and you mentioned that you handled data analysis for the company, the ATS will assume that you have 5 years worth of data analysis experience from that particular job. If a skill is listed on its own, for example, in the core skills section of your CV, the ATS will assign 6 months worth of experience for that particular skill. So that's why it's really important to reiterate your skills throughout your CV. Once is not enough for the computer, rather than just in a skill section or within within the job responsibilities under a job, for example. So my next top tip is avoid images, charts, and other graphics. Whilst they might look really nice, CVs with these things embedded in them make ATS technology, make it really hard for the bot to pick up any of the other information in your CV. For instance, if you insert an image or chart to showcase your skills, the ATS won't be able to read it. If you use a cool graphic to brand your name on your CV, often I see people with the Facebook icon and not Facebook, that was a terrible example, the LinkedIn icon, for example, the bot won't read that. It means nothing to the bot. And in fact, it scrambles the other data on the CV and makes it really hard for the bot to pick up any of the stuff that it needs to pick up to get you through that first CV sift. So don't include it. If you want to put a link to your LinkedIn, put the link to your LinkedIn. Don't put the LinkedIn logo or banner. The same applies to headshots, for example, but I'm gonna touch on that in a minute. So the next tip that I've got for you guys is keep it simple. Stick to simple bullet points. When used appropriately, bullet points are a really good method for highlighting accomplishments, responsibilities, and qualifications on a CV. Again, it's sort of the same principle. If you use really elaborate bullet points, like smiley faces, for example, I mean, that's completely ridiculous, but it's the only thing that comes to mind. The ATS technology gets really confused. So use the little squares and the little dots and just keep it really simple. Otherwise, your CV may not be compatible with ATS. And only include job responsibilities and achievements that are relevant to the job. So the next top tip, number 6, is use a clean CV design with a clear hierarchy. So when it comes to your CV's design, less is more. Not only do complex CV designs or unusual formats confuse applicant tracking systems, they also annoy recruiters. I can speak from experience. As a recruiter, if I'm sifting through 300 applications for one job, I want to know that that person can do that job in a minute. I mean, that's all I'm spending on the CV, the second CV sift, if I'm honest. The ATS system is the same. You need to keep it really simple so that it picks up all of the data that you need it to pick up to get through that first passe. If you want your CV to pass all ATS tests, really what you want to do is use a hybrid CV, which focuses on your work experience listed in a chronological order, rather than what's the word? I can't think what the word is, a functional format, which looks at sort of your abilities. So when you're listing your work experience, do it in a chronological order. Under the header, work history, and that explains and list the things that explain how you've leveraged your skills and experience to produce results for your employer. So I'm going to touch on achievements in a minute too. I'm not sure whether that's the next one. Let me have a look. So basically, most applicant tracking systems do a better job at reading and interpreting a hybrid format because they rely on chronological data to pass your CV. So that's, I guess, how you beat the bots in a really quick crash course. And I can talk to people about their personal CVs at a later date. I'm happy to take questions at the end. But I think if you keep those sort of 7, I think there were 6 or 7, was it? Yeah, 6 tips in mind, you'll yield better results. Your conversion from application to interview will be greater. So the next thing I wanted to focus on really was how not to irk recruiters. Because if you get past the bot, recruiters are and talent acquisition specialists. So you've got agency recruiters like me, and then you've got TAs or talent acquisition specialists who work in-house HR teams, for example. They're the people that you need to befriend. And the easiest way to do that is to make their jobs easy. So I'm going to share some of the things that sort of bug me and that I know really bug other recruiters, so you can avoid making these mistakes in future. Some of them are really obvious, but I mean, the number of times I come across silly things on CVs that I think, oh gosh, that must be common sense. Really, common sense is not that common. So we'll go through them all, and you can tell me whether any of them were useful at the end. Okay, so, oh, my cat's just go away. Sorry, my cat was about to do a cameo. Okay, so the first thing I think, and it's really obvious, but time and time again, I come across CVs that have spelling and grammatical errors on it. And as a recruiter, I really don't think there's any excuse for it. There's loads of, go away, my cat, sorry, give me a second. There's really no excuse for it in this day and age. So editing your CV to eliminate spelling and grammatical errors might seem obvious, but it's a mistake that is really common, and it will deter a recruiter recruiting you. So they're not going to put a candidate in front of their employer who's paying top dollar, or pound rather, that's the Australian in me, in front of, they're not going to put a candidate in front of a client who they don't feel can run a spell check, or who is too lazy to. So once you've done a spell check, have someone else read over your CV to check to the sort of errors that maybe spell check doesn't pick up, or that can be hard to spot once you've read over the same document over and over and over again. A second pair of eyes really helps. So find a critical friend who has sort of a laser focus for these types of things, good attention to detail, and ask them to give you an honest sort of review of your CV. In addition, you can print it out and read it to yourself. I find that will have someone read it to you. That for me is what I do when I edit sort of long documents that I've read over and over and over again, because when you read it out loud, I think it just sounds different to when you read it in your head. The other thing that you can do, which I have on absolutely everything, all of the programs that I use to write, is a program called Grammarly. What Grammarly does is it scans the document and it will pick up all manner of sort of errors, including contextual spelling mistakes. And they're the things that, say, word check in Word won't pick up, but they're really handy, even just from a learning perspective. Like, I've learned what a tautology is because I used to use loads of tautologies. Grammarly will teach you a great deal about the English language, and it's just a great way to safeguard yourself against silly mistakes that can be avoided, and that might mean the difference between you getting an interview and not. So the next one is really important, I think. Incorrect, missing, or inappropriate personal and contact information. So the goal of a CV is to get you through to an interview. If you're missing information that enables a recruiter to contact you, then you are not going to get through to the interview. How could you? If you're not detailed enough to provide the correct contact information, or you haven't reviewed your CV as a recruiter, that tells me that actually you're probably not taking your job hunt seriously, or you don't have a good eye for detail or focus on what's important. So I would be hesitant to contact a candidate who didn't, say, spell their email correctly, or who left a missing, a number off their mobile number on their CV, or who didn't include one or the other. So again, it all comes back to how easy you're going to make the recruiter to shortlist you. And this is just one of those mistakes that you cannot afford to make. Also be wary of the location and format you use to list your contact information. I did touch on this before, but often people, and I made the mistake of doing this as a candidate myself for many years, I would put my information in the header of each page. And it kind of like, if you're not a recruiter, that makes sense because then you can see it on every page. But again, the system, ATS will not pick it up. It can't read the information in the header, so you might as well not include it on the CV in the first place. So just be really wary of these things. The other thing that I think is quite important for people with protected characteristics, like people with a disability, is that you don't include that information on your CV. So it shouldn't matter whether you're gay or straight, have a disability or not, whether you're black, brown, orange or green. These things should not matter in the context of your application for employment. And the only time you would mention these on your CV is if the employer, the recruiter, was taking positive action in terms of their recruitment and wanted to recruit specifically from these groups of underrepresented talent, in which case you would know that by reading the job spec. So for example, one really good example is, black people are underrepresented at executive board level. So an organisation might engage someone like me to find candidates for a particular role where they can't find themselves, and those candidates would need to be black. It's not common practice for sort of lower level roles. I'd like to see more of it. But just be mindful that if your disability doesn't add strength to your CV, for example, you might be applying for a job at the RNIB, and lived experience is one of the criteria that they're assessing applications against. Your disability in that context would be considered an area of expertise, in which case you would put it on your CV. But for any role not requiring lived experience or knowledge of the sight loss sector or policy relating to sight loss, it's not important, leave it off. Unfortunately, we live in a time where people can be quite biased, and recruiters are included in that group of people, and sometimes we forget to check our unconscious bias, and you wouldn't want to give someone the opportunity to discriminate against you just because you've got a disability or other protected characteristic. So the next one is, it's so common. The next one I think is about using sort of professional email addresses or not using unprofessional ones. So sexysimon@gmail.com, Betty Boop 1972 at Hotmail, they're not the one. Please, please, please think about, these are your first impressions. Recruiters take notice of these things, so do employers. No one's going to take you seriously if you're writing from an email, sexysimon@gmail.com. So just these little sort of, little attention to detail things, considerations will really make the difference between, if there's a tiebreaker situation, for example, and the client wants 6 people to shortlist and you're as good as the 6th person, but your email is ridiculous. They're always going to go for the one with the professional email. So I know it doesn't seem important, but I can't tell you how important it is to think about these things. Okay, so the next tip, I guess, is to not include outdated or irrelevant information on your CV. So if you've got information that is outdated or irrelevant on your CV will likely go in the trash. Recruiters are really busy people. Their goal at the end of the day is to fill vacancies and to bill. If they have to read 2 pages of irrelevant information to get to the data that they need to shortlist you, I can guarantee your CV will be discarded into the bin. Things like your age, completely irrelevant, don't include it. It should have no bearing on whether or not you make a good candidate for the role. I often see marital status on CVs. Again, none of anyone's business. Don't include it. It does not strengthen your CV, and it honestly, it doesn't, it's a really dated approach to CV writing. And as a recruiter in this moment, if I read that, I actually think this person's probably not abreast of the things that they need to be abreast of in terms of their job hunt. And it makes me feel like they actually haven't done the research and haven't prepared very well for their job search. Okay, so my next slide, I think, is about bragging well. So I come across CV after CV that does not list any achievements. And I've sort of, often I'll do a CV review with a candidate, and I say, well, what are you proud of? Like, what did you achieve in this role? And they say, oh, well, I had that on my CV, but the job centre said don't put it on, or my sister said don't put it on. They are wrong. I mean, if you take one thing away from this presentation, is bragging well on a CV is absolutely what you should be doing. A recruiter wants to see the results you've achieved in past positions because it speaks to your potential to do well in the role that they're recruiting for. So results are best when they are quantifiable. And I think that's the trick. Things like business growth numbers, things like improved retention stats, increased sales, those types of things that are quantifiable, they're tangible results, are the best achievements to put in your CV. And it actually proves that not only did you have the responsibility of doing the job, but you actually did it well. So people get really stumped on this. My candidates, people, particularly candidates who sort of lack confidence in their abilities, or they've been searching for a long time, they're really disheartened by the process and their self-esteem is low. I think the trick to sort of understanding what your achievements are, and this is a question I ask my candidates, is what are you most proud of? If you can answer that question, the likelihood is that your answer to that question is what most recruiters would consider an achievement. So when you get to that part in your CV and you're not sure, ask yourself the question, what am I most proud of? And then jot that down. And then think about, how do you quantify it? Okay, so the next one is buzzwords for buzzwords' sake. I kind of touched on this earlier. It's really important to, sorry, I've got an itchy nose. It's really important to include keywords from the job posting in your CV to ensure that it passes the applicant tracking system, and so that the recruiter can scan your CV and see that you've probably got the experience to do the job. However, when you do that and you don't do it in a natural way, it can feel like from a recruiter's perspective, it can feel like you're stuffing keywords into your CV for the sake of getting past that first CV sift. But ultimately, when the human eye reads it, it becomes painfully obvious that actually this person is just playing the game, playing the system. So what I tell my candidates to do is ask someone else to read your CV, or their CV rather, and see if any of the keywords stand out in an unforgiving way. You need to find natural ways to talk about the same skills, the same competencies on multiple occasions throughout your document without making it seem forced for the sake of getting it through the ATS system. I think this next one, and in fact, I probably should have included this at the start of the list because I know there's a lot of information here, but I think this is really one of the biggest mistakes that people make in terms of their job search. I spoke to a candidate the other day, and he told me he sent his CV to 1,600 jobs. And then I opened up his CV and I asked him what jobs. And he said X, Y, and Z, sales, customer service, and something else, I can't remember what it was. And I read his CV and I said, I actually don't know what job you're applying for when I read this CV. That is a huge mistake. If you are using the same CV for every single job that you apply for, you should expect to get no responses. You don't need to do a full overhaul of your CV for every job, but you do need to tweak the CV to align with every job that you apply to. So a seasoned recruiter is going to know. I mean, I wouldn't even say a seasoned recruiter. I think that's overstating things. Anyone with an ounce of common sense is going to know if you've spent time tailoring the job. Your CV needs to say why you want the job and what skills you bring and what value you add with your application. If the recruiter can read the job, read your CV rather, and they don't know what job you're applying to, then you might as well not send the CV. And actually it comes across as lazy. So my thinking is quality over quantity. There's no point in applying for 100 jobs if you only get one invitation to interview, when you could apply for 10 jobs and get 8 invitations to interview. So think about the jobs you're applying to. I know it can feel sort of like, oh God, I've got to get them out. I've got to get as many as possible to increase my chances. If you're not tailoring your CV and customizing it to make to each job listing that you're applying to, you will not get past the recruiter. And actually, you know, often you'll be applying to multiple jobs being looked after by the same recruiter. And if the same recruiter sees that Joe Blow has applied for 10 vacancies, they're all different vacancies, but with the same CV, he's not, or she is not going to take you seriously. So please take the time, focus on quality over quantity, and you will yield the results that you deserve. So the next one that I find incredibly annoying as a recruiter is the use of repetitive words or phrases in each under each job. So you may have done a sales assistant role 3 times in your career. I heard you the first time. If you're not going to take the time to rewrite your job duties in a way that doesn't feel repetitive, then don't put them in your CV. Just do a bullet point saying, you know, role and responsibility commensurate with, and then the other sales jobs that you've done. My feeling is that recruiters really appreciate effort, and so do hiring managers or in-house teams. So I think it's really worth finding different ways to talk about the different job responsibilities you've done. And I mean, ultimately, you will have different achievements under each of those job responsibilities. So again, take the time, don't be lazy, you will reap the benefits. So the next one I touched on, oh, have I gone back? Okay, I don't know, I think I've got my notes here and the next one should be Mugshots are dated. I don't know where that is. Hang on, let me have a look. Oh, there we go. I might have added a new slide because I think I touched on buzzwords before. Anyway, so the next one is mugshots. What I mean by mugshots are headshots. They're very old school, and unless you're an actor in this day and age, just leave them out. It's not common practice to use them in the UK, and I think you run the risk of being perceived in ways that you don't want to be perceived. Everyone has sort of different ideas about mugshots. I think most recruiters will agree they're dated and not sort of required. Some recruiters will go as far to say that they're quite egotistical and a bit sort of, I don't know, self-promoting, but not in the right way. You know, you want to brag well. A headshot does nothing for that, or nothing to prove that you're the right candidate for the job. So the last, I think it's the last one, is less is more. When it comes to your CV format, less is more. Stick to a simple, clean design. And tell the story of your career. I don't want to know what you had for breakfast. I don't want to know where you lived or grew up as a child. None of that bears any relevance to your job search. What I want to know is what jobs have you done? What responsibilities did you have and what did you achieve? And then a summary of your skills. Okay? So, you know, I think it's, again, it comes back to recruiters are really busy people. They're often working to tight deadlines. If a person has to sift through your life story to get the information they need, they will put your CV in the bin. And this kind of, I mean, this is sort of a follow-on. You know, when you're a recruiter, seeing dense sort of chunks of copy can be quite overwhelming. So what I suggest is use like a mix of short paragraphs to describe your role under your work history header, and then bullet points to highlight your relevant qualifications, the things that you did to contribute to the company and your team specifically, as well as your achievements. So the next one's age-old question that no one ever seems to be able to answer is, how long should your CV be? I think if you can ask, how long is my CV, and someone replies, how long is a piece of string, it's probably too long. Most recruiters, I think, will say 2 pages, no more. I'm in 2 minds about that. I think it really depends on the individual and their work history. So to give you an example, when I came over to the UK and I landed in London, my first ever job was actually with Thomas Pocklington. I used to manage the community centre in Balham, and my experience is over 7 years old now. So most recruiters would say, 7 years or over 2 pages, don't include it in your CV. But if I were tendering for this piece of work, if Thomas Pocklington put a bid out and said, we're looking for someone to run this CV masterclass, and it's actually for people with vision impairment, then my CV or my experience from way back when that most recruiters would say don't include is actually quite relevant, because I understand the challenges that people with sight loss and vision impairment experience in an employment context. So I kind of think you need to think really critically about what you're putting on your CV. And if you go over the 2-page mark, you need to be quite clear in terms of why that's a good decision. So this rule is, I don't think it's a golden rule, but I think it's something that everyone needs to consider very carefully if they choose to go over the 2-page mark. Okay, the last I don't know why these, sorry, apologies, these slides are a bit funny. So the next one that I want to talk through, and that hasn't really been covered off in my sort of previous bits, is when to use an objective statement. So, oh, my cat's doing its thing again, sorry. So CV objective statements are a thing of the past, unless you're someone with no work experience at all. So I think when I receive a CV and it's got an objective statement on it, oh, sorry, my cat's doing it properly. When I read a CV that's got an objective statement on it, I kind of feel like the candidate's not up to speed with current trends. They haven't done their research. They haven't put the work in to understand what a CV should look like and what it should include. And again, recruiters, they're biased people like every other human in the world. You don't want to give them an opportunity to discriminate against you or put your CV in the bin. So an objective statement is usually 1 or 2 lines that talks about your goals. So to give you an example, an objective statement might read like something like this: motivated, fast learner who recently graduated with a degree in whatever, looking for opportunities in wherever, that will allow me to leverage my insert skills here. So when you first graduate from college and you've not had, or university, and you don't have work experience, that's perfectly acceptable. I would expect that type of summary to appear on someone with someone's CV with no work experience. But if you've got even one decent chunk of work experience, what we should really be aiming for is a professional summary. So they're less vague. They don't tend to include fluffy sort of marketing buzzwords, and they provide more value to the recruiter or the employer in terms of really focusing down on what you bring to, or what you could bring to the organisation that you're applying to. So the other thing that, you know, is worth noting is an objective statement. It kind of focuses on what you want and what your needs are and what your goals are, when really what the recruiter, the employer is interested in is what you bring to them and what you offer them. So instead, my advice is, I think I've got another slide for this as well. Yeah. So my advice is always write a professional summary. A professional summary is sort of similar in length, but instead of focusing on what you want, what you need, what your career aspirations are, it focuses on highlighting the qualifications, so all of your selling points for the job you're applying to. So a good CV professional summary will mention your level of experience and your achievements, things that you bring that would be considered added value, that are relevant to the industry or the role you're applying for. This section of the CV will set the tone and focused on, and the focus for the recruiter on the rest of the document. So as a recruiter, what I mean by that is, as a recruiter, if I read an awful personal summary, I'm just going to assume that the rest of the content in that candidate's CV is not worth reading. It's kind of like, I'm sure all of you have heard of sort of an elevator pitch. This is the CV equivalent of an elevator pitch. So this is your opportunity to pitch very quickly why you're the best candidate for the job to a prospective employer. And again, this comes back to when you're applying for lots of different roles, it might not be the same roles. In fact, no roles are the same roles because all employers are different. So they're all looking for different things. This is the bit that's really important to tailor. So you might apply to 10, admin assistant roles, but 3 of them could be in the charity sector, 1 of them could be with a startup, and the other 6 could be for corporate employers. Each of those businesses are going to sort of in different environments in terms of the labour market, and they'll all want different things. So, you know, charities typically or traditionally like to know about a candidate's sort of values, for example, whereas corporates maybe not so much. So when you're writing a professional summary, the things to keep in mind, I guess, are what the recruiter will want to know is, why are you qualified for the job that you're applying for? Make it really easy for them. Tell them what about your experience, your education, the skills you've acquired through your career are relevant to the job you're applying to. And what I want to know as a recruiter also is how have these abilities in the past created results for your former employers? So I can actually see, oh, this person's got potential. So that brings us to the end of this section of the webinar. Before I answer your question, I just think it's really important to recap. And I think if you can take away three key messages from the presentation, they are these 3 key messages. So the jobs market is saturated with viable candidates, and you're all competing for a reduced number of jobs. At the moment, the economy is not doing so great, but it will pick up. And I think it would be sensible to use this time to really refine the tools that you need to get you in front of recruiters and get you in front of hiring managers. It can be really tough, so be kind to yourself and cut yourself a little bit of slack. The second key takeaway, I think, is to get your CV in front of an actual human, you've got to beat the bots. Spend the time developing an intelligent CV for each job role you wish to apply to, and use those beat the bot tips that I spoke about earlier, because you will yield better results, I can guarantee it. The last one, and I can say this because I'm a recruiter, we're lazy creatures. The easier you make it for a recruiter to shortlist your application, the more likely you will convert your applications into interviews. It's that simple. So please apply for less jobs and apply and make the applications you do submit really, really good quality, because there's no point in applying for hundreds of jobs if you're not going to get an interview out of any of them. Okay? So that's it in terms of the information I think that I can impart on you that you probably haven't heard before. I don't know whether you can hear my cat in the background. I apologise, I should have locked him out. I would love to take some questions from the floor if that's of use. And then before we wrap up, maybe I can give you a little bit of information about Radical Recruit and how we operate. And if I can help any of you on your job search, I'd be delighted. Thank you.
That's great. Cheers, Emma. That was really good. I enjoyed that. I think I might have to change my email address from sexy@gmail.com there. So. No, I thought the ATS stuff was really interesting. You know, that is something which, unfortunately, all candidates, regardless of disability, are having to contend with these days, and it's it's kind of makes. I've worked in recruitment myself, so I know that, you know, one of the hardest things is trying to shortlist 200-300 applications. If people text going to do that for you, then you're going to use it, aren't you? So
that's one of the, when I started in recruitment, that was one of the things that I wish I really knew when I was a candidate, because it's so disheartening, almost soul destroying, depending on how long you're sort of looking for a job, to be applying with what you think is a really good CV and just not getting the call back. I mean, I think all of the other things I've sort of touched on, people already know, and it's mostly, I'm just refreshing your memory. But yeah, definitely beating the bots. If you can just focus on that, ladies and gentlemen, you'll yield better results.
One of the questions which just come through is if we can share the links to Grammarly and something else. So yeah, no problems.
Yeah, Wordle. They're really great. Especially when you're, like, I use them for writing emails as well. You can link them to your LinkedIn. Sorry, my cat is determined to get in front of this screen. Apologies. He's been bugging me all through the thing. It's very distracting. Lucky I love him and I can forgive him. So I use LinkedIn, you know, when you're writing really quickly, and I would imagine for people with sight loss or vision impairment, it's even more challenging because you can't see what you've written necessarily. To have these little tools in your back pocket, even as a sighted person, they're invaluable. And I think, again, it comes back to like that first impression as a recruiter. If someone's submitted a document that is just grammatically incorrect or laborious to read or is tedious to read, I just don't take them seriously because I figure they haven't actually put in the effort. And what does that say about them as a candidate? Not a great deal of good stuff.
To be honest, when I did used to have to sift through 200-300 emails, the first thing that I do is look for spelling mistakes and they'd be discarded straight away. So. Yeah. I'd like to say as well, if anybody who's tuned into this webinar and has, you know, needs their CV looking over, please do drop us an email at employment@trust.org.uk. We can, you know, we'll definitely do that for you. We'll check the grammar, we'll check the formatting, we'll make suggestions on how to improve it. So,
yeah, and I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, Martin, I've never used this personally, but something that I read recently, there are recruiters who will give you a free CV review, and they have technology, well, they can put your CV through an ATS, and technology that will tell you how your CV performs and what the keywords are, so you can sort of cross-check where you want to be with where you are. I'll do some more reading and send you some links, or speak to some of my proper recruiter friends and send you over some resources if I can find them. But that might be worth looking into.
Just going to have a quick look at the question list.
I can't see the questions, I'm afraid.
So somebody's asked us, I help people with multiple barriers to work. Could you please include the source of your stats, i.e. the 23% of jobs which are at risk? think you did mention the source of that, right, earlier?
Yeah, so all of the information, all of the stats come from the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. And if you're interested in looking at or understanding what the jobs market is doing, they provide sort of daily updates, and they're basically the link between Number 10 and businesses in the UK. Neil Carberry is the CEO of the REC, and he's on Twitter. He produces a weekly blog, and he talks all things employment and recruitment in the UK, and that's a really great resource in terms of if you're wanting to stay up to date with movement in the labour market, and they sort of provide predictions and things like that in terms of what we can expect to see. And yes, I can find where I found that. I think it might have been one of their tweets, if I'm honest. So I'm not sure I'll be able to give you a link.
Yeah, no, I think just the source will be fine, and then Belinda should come to.
Absolutely.
So, we'll write that up, Belinda. Don't worry. I'm struggling to read the here.
So I can see one here. I think it's from John Paul.
Yeah.
Should I look for John Connor? Oh, no, I don't know what. No, that's probably not a question that makes any sense. How is discrimination managed by the ATS software under the instance of indirect discrimination under the Equality Act? It's not. The software doesn't discriminate. That's humans who discriminate. So I work with all manner of people with barriers to work, so not just people with protected characteristics. And, you know, they might get through a first CV sift and beat the bot. And then, you know, perhaps they disclose that they've got a conviction as part of the application process. So though their CV might get past the ATS technology, as soon as a recruiter sees that they've ticked the I've got a criminal conviction box, they throw the application in the bin. So the reason I sort of touched on that was it's really we've all got different abilities. Unless your different abilities lend weight to your application, like any piece of information, if it's not relevant to the job, don't include it in your CV. There's people with disabilities enjoy certain protections in the context of employment. If you feel like you've been discriminated against because you have one of those protected characteristics, then there's loads of resource, and actually Thomas Pocklington would be a great place to start in terms of understanding your rights with regard to employment law and what you can do to challenge and appeal decisions by employers who you think perhaps have not given you the job because of your disability. But again, I just think unless it lends weight to your application, don't include it.
Yes, I'd reiterate that. You know, there's different thought, you know, different schools of thought on this as well. I know some blind and partially sighted people that kind of promoted that fact. You know, I've got a disability because it's you know, it's in kind of the tech world. They're always looking for people who do things differently, especially for kind of study at an advantage. So it's kind of personal choice, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you
obligation to put it on, that's for sure. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like if you look at, say, the creative industry, you know, advertising, you know, Mother, for example, or I don't know, other big sort of advertising creative conglomerates, they pay big bucks for people to come up with fresh ideas. Yeah. So if you see the world through a different lens, you know, someone who's not male, white, sighted, then you should be, well, I would consider you an asset in that context because you see the world through a different lens. Your experience is different to most of the candidates that will be applying for creative jobs. Therefore, your ideas will be fresh. I mean, that's what they want at the end of the day, diversity. And any business with an ounce of common sense will be able to review the evidence and decide that, yes, diversity drives innovation, and innovation drives business success. So really, in an ideal world, employers should be making these processes more accessible to people with disabilities, more accessible to ex-offenders, more accessible to homeless people who are underrepresented in the labour market. Unfortunately, I don't think we're quite there yet, but if you think that your disability is an asset and actually strengthens your CV, then absolutely talk about it. Absolutely. But I wouldn't put in your profile summary, I am disabled, as the first line. There are different ways you can talk about your disability so that you frame yourself as an expert or as someone who is going to drive business success or who is going to be more innovative than, you know, the next candidate who may have full use of their site.
Yeah, totally. We've had another question from somebody who's standing as anonymous. How can you make your CV stand out when you lack recent experience?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think as a result of COVID, recruiters are going to have to start thinking differently about career gaps. So recruiters are notoriously bad at discarding any CV onto the talent scrap heap that have sort of more than 3 months gap. But the reality is that hundreds of thousands of people are on furlough, therefore they're not using their skills, which is effectively a career gap, or people are being made redundant. So this whole idea about career gaps, not having recent work experience, I think we're going to have to, as a sector, and I really hope that we do, rethink. I think if I were a candidate with a lack of recent work experience, I would be looking for ways to refresh my skills or keep them current. So some of the things that you can do is learning. Other things you can do are things like volunteering. Think about your sort of experience and skills more creatively. So, you know, I think about like single mums, for example. I've got a candidate and she has 3 kids and she's a single mum. She's got no family support. So she's had a career gap to look after her family, a 3-year career gap. But she used to be a PA. And I kind of think about the things that she has to do to keep her home running. So essentially she's the PA to 3 tiny humans. So many of the skills that she uses in the career that she wants to return to are still relevant because she's you know, keeping 3 different diaries, she's booking appointments, she's making travel arrangements, she's you know, ordering online groceries and making meals, you know, all of these things. She's able to prioritize her time, deal with competing sort of tasks, all of these things that you look for in a PA, she's still doing. It's just in a different way. So, I mean, if you can't volunteer, if you're not in a position where you think education is for you or it's not accessible at the moment for whatever reason, think about how you can frame your lived experience of being a mum, of having a disability, whatever it is, in a way that showcases your skills and the sort of personal attributes that the employer is looking for, the recruiter is looking for, and write them as if they're a job.
I think, you know, even finding voluntary kind of positions as on a board of trustees for charity or things like that.
I'm really sorry, Martin, I couldn't hear any of that, mate.
Sorry. I think also, you know, looking at any kind of trustee roles that you might be able to find working for a charity always look really good as well.
Yeah, and again, like executive level roles and trustee roles generally lack, you know, within organisations, these groups of people or teams rather, they lack diversity. So, you know, if you're, say you've got a sight loss service provider who's looking for a trustee role, absolutely apply for it. Why not? Again, you still need to tailor your application for that particular job spec, and they will be looking for certain types of people with certain types of skills. So I'm not saying apply for every trustee role, but yeah, those types of unpaid roles come up, and you know, businesses pay big money to engage recruiters like me to do executive search. for trustee roles in particular, because most businesses realise that actually their boards lack diversity and they need people who see the world through different lenses.
Also, off the back of COVID-19, there's actually been a lot of online training which has become
there's loads of free stuff.
It's I've kind of been doing quite a bit over the week, on my weekends and stuff. So there's been another question about career breaks, but I think we've covered that in the last answer. So.
I mean, the trick I think is to be honest as well. It's like don't say don't try and hide it. I mean, people do take career breaks for lots of different reasons. You could be unwell, you could have decided to travel, you could have been volunteering all of that time. So say it. I mean, if an employer is going to overlook you or a recruiter is going to overlook you because you've taken time off to look after your health, then they're probably not people you want to work for or with. That's my feeling. And ultimately, at the end of the day, yes, having a job and being able to pay the bills is really important, but you need to find a role within an organisation that is a good fit for you. So I think, set the bar a little bit higher maybe, and don't work with just any old recruiter. You want to find recruiters that are going to work with you and for you, not who are sort of only concerned with billing. And they do exist. I'm one of them. There's loads of wonderful people in the recruitment space who are doing really good work. In-house teams are, I think, better at sort of that human element of recruitment. But I think, trying to hide it is not going to work, because anyone who sees your CV will be able to see that there are gaps in your work experience, whether you acknowledge them or not. So you might as well just be honest.
I'm going to apologise. Apparently, the sound isn't coming through very well on my computer. So if anybody can't hear me, I apologise. I might have to ask for TPT to find me we also had another question about when is the right time to disclose your disability if it isn't relevant to the role?
So I think what my experience is that there are some employers who really understand what it means to be disability confident, and they've got the systems and structures in place to ensure that people like you can navigate through their processes. They understand how access to work operates, and they have people who are fully equipped to have conversations that perhaps other people find challenging. Then you've got all the other employers. So I think I would typically put it in a cover letter. The cover letter doesn't address your skills and abilities necessarily. It's just a note to the employer to accompany your CV, unless obviously you've been asked to sort of answer key selection criteria or speak to the job spec. Or at the point where you are preparing to go to interview. So good employers that are aware of candidates with a disability will ask, are there any special adjustments that you require to participate in this process? That would be the point where I tell them about my disability or your disability. I don't think it should be treated as like this, I hate the word disclose. We say disclose your conviction, and it's like really taboo. I think, you should, whenever it feels right, I guess, for you. I just don't think it should go on your CV.
Yeah,
so once you've been shortlisted and you've got to the point where, okay, you've been assessed against all of everyone else in the recruitment race, and you are one of the better candidates, good enough to get an interview, then that's when you talk about the fact that you might need, a screen reader to do a test or whatever sort of adjustment that you need. Employers, I think, walk the employers through it so it doesn't feel like this big thing that's so difficult to overcome. You and I both know, we all know it's not. We know that with reasonable adjustments, people can have really meaningful careers and do really meaningful work. But some employees just find it hard to have those conversations. So you kind of need to take the lead. And I guess you do it when you're comfortable.
Yeah, I think it's when you're comfortable and when you need to ask for reasonable adjustment, I guess, which does lend itself to interview. You know, that is most likely when you're going to need your employer to step up and make some reasonable adjustments. But equally, you know, you've kind of got to be the expert in it. So when you're asking for your adjustments, you know, you kind of need to have a practical solution, because not every employer or every line manager or every recruitment manager can know about every single adjustment that people might need to be made. So if you can kind of show a bit of confidence and stuff, then you know, then that puts them more at ease. You know,
it's just making it easier, isn't it, Martin?
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, there might be some people on the webinar that don't know this, but I'm totally blind myself. And when I've gone for roles in the past, I've took my laptop with me. And I've gone, look, this is how JAWS works. You know, this is how I reply to emails. This is how I use the internet. And you know, that's proved a really efficient way of getting people on board. So.
Yeah, I had a candidate at the end of last year. He was applying for a role and he had to do a test, and he had said that the employee did all the right things. What do you need to do the test? And he said, I need a screen reader or whatever it was. And basically they had purchased and installed software that he wasn't familiar with, and he was using a computer that he'd never used before. And he couldn't do the assessment. And I sort of came back to him. I said, well, you know, you said you needed X, Y, and Z. They provided that. You need to be more specific. So you can't assume that employers know what you know about your requirements, access requirements. So just take the lead on that and feel confident that you know yourself well enough to articulate your requirements.
We've had another question come through about if we'll recommend any professional recruitment agencies. We're unable to endorse any recruitment agencies, really. You know, we've got Emma to do this talk tonight, and she'll.
I don't mind if you. That doesn't bother me at all. There's plenty of pie for people to go. I will actually say, if you're a person with a disability looking for a job, there's a really great organisation. They're a charity called Clean. Or let me double check. It's headed up by Jane Hatton. I think it's Clean Sheet, but do you know Jane?
Yeah, Clear Break, is it? I think.
Oh, Clear Break, is it? I'll send through the link. But basically, they've got this amazing jobs board with employers who are disability confident, who are doing more than what most people do when they get the little logo and put it on their
even break.
That's right. And so basically employers pay to advertise their role on Even Break's jobs board with a view to attracting candidates with a disability. So that's what's called positive action, and it's a really beautiful thing. And they have some really amazing roles come up. They're not roles that you can get, you know, they're jobs that you might want, you know, they're not sort of, you know, the jobs that no one else wants to do. There's some really skilled roles with some amazing employers, and they provide a really great service to candidates as well. So if you're not registered with them, let them know who you are. Obviously you can register with Radical Recruit. In terms of other recruiters who do sort of support people with disabilities specifically, or people with sight loss or vision impairments, I'm not aware of any. I think there's lots of sort of jobs brokerage services that are run through like the local authorities, for example, and they will have provision for people with disabilities. They're, I think, a far cry from recruitment services. And I couldn't speak to their efficacy personally. I think really if you've sort of got a great CV that gets past the bots and in front of recruiters, and you're really tailoring your job search, you're going to have much better results than, you know, throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks.
It also depends on what sector you're looking for as well.
Absolutely.
And things like that. So, I think that might be it for the questions, Emma. So if you have any final things that you want to say.
Are you talking to me? Sorry.
I'm saying, sorry. If there's, we don't seem to have any more questions. So is there any kind of parting statement that you'd like to?
I just think I'm sure all of you've got oodles of potential, and if you're anything like the candidates that I meet, you just don't know it. So have confidence in your abilities and your former experience, and take the opportunity to brag well when you're writing your CVs, and really just tailor your job search to jobs that you really want. And spend the time creating intelligent CVs that beat the bots and grab the attention of the recruiter, because your conversion rate from application to interview is going to be far greater if you spend the time. And just thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed the session, and it was a delight.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's been really amazing, and I really appreciate your time, particularly on probably the hottest evening of the year as well. So.
Yeah, pretty warm. All right, so thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thank you, Emma. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.